heist. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't go.
Okay, Rob. Hey, important announcement. So we've finally been able to attract a sponsor for the podcast. So please, everyone, it helps keep the show on the air. Don't hit that skip 10 seconds forward. Here's a word from our sponsors.
So how can you securely grow your business while staying efficient and creating value? The Pinkerton Total Risk Perspective identifies the interconnected impact that risks have on all areas of your organization, and then develops a solution based on your risk profile. The 4 quadrants of our Total Risk Perspective cover hazard and event, round-the-clock awareness of disasters of health, environment, or even social violence.
Social violence, Rob. We got to watch out for that.
Tracking your system integrity, IP, and any disruptive potentials. Market and economic, a constant survey of political instability and macroeconomic
Watch out, populists
risks.
are coming.
Operational and physical, the nuts and bolts of your day-to-day, supply chains, workforce, and business continuity. Because adversity in one quadrant can quickly spread to the others, an integral comprehension of how these work together is key to protecting your business. With the right perspective, you will focus less on security and more on the critical needs of your business. With the right perspective, you can navigate a chaotic risk landscape to a safe and productive future. The Pinkerton Total Risk Perspective. Pinkerton, we never sleep.
Not only, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Wouldn't you like to have a diverse asset protection company that never sleeps, Rob?
Never sleeps. What's amazing about the Pinkertons is that they haven't changed their logo or their slogan since they were literally outlawed by the U.S. government. Like
there's a whole law called the Anti-Pinkerton Act.
The Anti-Pinkerton law. Like the people running the Pinkerton Detective Agency were like, let's lay low for a generation, but not change anything. And then just come right back. And people are going to love the creepy eye. They're going to love the never sleep. They're going to love that association with union breaking. And you know what? That's our competitive advantage. And fuck me, they were right. Companies are hiring the literal Pinkerton Detective Agency. It's like I don't know. It's like hiring the Pinkerton Detective Agency. I'm having trouble coming up with an equally evil.
It's like
firm.
I used to live a quarter mile from where they just murdered a bunch of people. You know, it's and everyone remembers that, right?
Yes. That's I mean, it's not well known, but I honestly think that Red Dead Redemption has reintroduced the fact that Pinkertons suck to, a new generation. The Pinkertons were the bad guys in 310 to Yuma, the remake. Right. People it's just if you don't know what we're talking about, that's good. We'll probably talk about it in more detail on an upcoming podcast. But for right now, this is Dungeon Master of None.
I'm Dungeon Master Matt.
And I'm Dungeon Master Rob, and we're not talking about the Pinkertons anymore, though tangentially we might in terms of private investigators and or law enforcement or security. But no, what are we talking about today, Matt?
Right. When we get to a random table, you can add them in for whatever bad guy you need. Today, it's the Dungeon Master of None Guide to Running Heists.
Running Heists, yes. And I was shocked when Matt suggested this because I was sure that we had done a whole episode on heists, but we have not. We've talked a lot about heists, but we haven't actually done the full episodes. I'm very excited to talk about heists. I have many strong feelings about heists.
Rob, I'm in. Son of a bitch.
I'm in. We're in.
All right. Yeah. I mean, we love heists. It's great in that it's one of those few things out there that everyone knows what it is, right? Because there's too many movies, whole TV shows, right?
Whole TV shows.
That every episode is a heist, right? Mm-hmm. You can check out the DriveThruRPG.
Yep.
If you want. But yeah, everyone knows what a heist is. Everyone, I think, would like to run one every once in a while in their game. Why heists, Rob? Let's talk big picture here.
Well, that's a good question, and you're right that there's just so many heist movies, TV shows, books. Just a heist is one of the the most well-trodden formulas. And I'm interested in your take on this. I have my thoughts, but it doesn't ever really like. There's not a lot of innovation in the heist genre necessarily. There's
Right.
not no real like new. Like you can only get so clever before you've completely like gone off the rails. But
Unless you're Christopher Nolan and you're like,
That's
what
right.
if I?
That's right. You
What
gotta
if I
you gotta
stole
do
a
it
dream?
several layers deep dream heist. But besides that, I still love to see a heist movie. I still love watching. I'll watch every Ocean's movie that comes out because it's just a good time. Like it's a formula that doesn't get old in a way that I think a lot of other formulas kind of do. And we'll talk about sort of like the component elements of a heist. But even though, the structure of something like Ocean's 11 and something a lot more avant-garde like Inception is essentially the same, there's just like a great deal of variation within them. And even when there's not, it's just good fun. I just like a heist.
Yeah, like everyone knows what's going on. They understand the idea of the heist, which is so rare because one of the big barriers to entry for a lot of tabletop role-playing games is just making sure everyone knows what the fuck is going on here.
Yeah,
and
right.
a heist, like some of the most successful indie games, right? It's like, okay, I've clearly laid out what's happening here. In Brindlewood Bay, it's Murder, She Wrote, but maybe with dark magic, right? And everyone can understand that because they know the old lady cozy type mystery. And the same is true writ large with heists. They're cross genre too. Like you can have a fantasy heist, you can have a sci-fi heist. In fact, there's been many. You can have a superhero heist. The kind of boring Ant-Man movie was kind of like that, right? There's no genre that can't benefit from a heist.
The recent D&D movie, Honor Amongst Thieves, was a heist within a heist. It was like a heist on top of a heist. Like it works. It really does like work in any genre. And I think that's because it's now become like recognizably anyone who's even the teensiest bit like has seen anything really understands the sort of like structure of a heist. And Matt made this point a while ago, but I think it's a really good point that having sort of like a shared language or understanding of like the setting and structure really helps your players sit down and start to play. And if you tell most modern people you're in a heist, they'll get it. They know what type of game they're in, what type of story they're in, and they're ready to get going. You don't have to like, you can explain the setting, but they know what they're supposed to do.
Some games are specifically structured for playing heists, right? We've talked about Blades in the Dark and Shadowrun here before, but even in games that are not, designed around the heists are fun, I think, for two very important reasons for you, the game master. One, like it's a chance to mix things up. If you've been exploring strange new worlds or wildernesses filled with ancient elven runes and fighting monsters, like it's a chance to put like a little more human drama and a human element at the center of tonight's session. And many of the same tools that you've developed in your Dungeon Master toolbox, like drawing maps, creating dungeons, coming up with a random table, perfectly translate to heists, right? Dungeon drawing and heist map drawing, they're exactly the same.
This is actually a point I was going to make is feels like increasingly often I've been saying, D&D is maybe not the best system for this. And there are more specialized systems, but I actually think that D&D is a pretty good system for running a heist. I actually think that it works pretty well, that there's a lot of like
stealth rules, magic's very defined.
Yes.
Perfect.
It's really easy to set up challenges that are solvable within the D&D tool set. And we'll talk more about that when we get into nuts and bolts, but I actually, you could run heists in another system, but if you like D&D and you want to stick with it, I think running a heist or running a heist focused campaign is very doable, and you're not going to have to do quite as much modification or as much stretching to make that fit. It's going to feel a little bit more natural than trying to do a social game or something that's high drama. And yeah, there are lots of systems. There are probably more systems. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but it feels like there are more systems, indie and otherwise, that are specifically for heists than almost anything else at this point. Like, I especially in the last 20 years, like, I guess if you take the full gamut, there's probably more, like, tactical dungeon crawling games of one sort or another. But you can find heists in everything from, like, one-shot form to just deep, complex, dedicated systems around
Honey
heists.
Heist about criminal bears to Monty Cook's new fancy game. Was it called Stealing Lies to Tell the Devil?
From the Devil or something?
Yeah, very cool. And I think one of the things that makes Heist pretty appealing from this side of the GM screen is that, in my opinion, I think they're way less prep.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, you really just have to come up with a scenario, and it leaves you a lot of room to improv, and then a lot of your time at the session is going to be your players making plans and encountering things, and it really puts a lot of the initiative on your players, which will be a lot of fun in most cases. And I also think it's a chance to put a lot of weirdness into your game. I think that's true of basically every type of game that you could run in D&D or any other system. But, like, there's no reason a heist has to be stealing a lockbox full of coins from a corrupt merchant, right?
Right.
You can put the fantasy in fantasy role-playing games. Steal from the god. Steal someone's dream. Steal from, a crazy wizard school. Go really out there.
Fantasy is also great for my favorite type of, heist variation, the reverse heist. You have to put something back. That's, that doesn't always make a lot of sense in like why would you do a reverse bank robbery? But there's lots of reasons why in like a fantasy setting.
If you work for the Pinkertons.
Yeah. You might want to have your players might want to take something and put it back without being discovered or do it in a particularly clever way. I think Matt's right that there's less prep than other forms of gameplay, because obviously you have to get your players on board, but once you do, the objective is set, right? They can't go like completely off the rails because they are trying to get to a thing or a location or achieve a pretty like concrete goal. They can do a ton of things within that, but you never have to worry that they're gonna fuck off and completely ignore the objective once they have committed to the heist one way or another. And that makes this a lot. We've talked about a lot about how restrictions actually encourage creativity, and the heist is a perfect just like package of structure and narrative and focus so that you can have fun and your players can have fun within sort of like the boundaries of an easily understood narrative package.
In a similar vein, one of the most common complaints we hear from dungeon masters is like, my players never run away, or they're always fighting whatever it is head on, and even if it's like more powerful than them. And the clear objective of the heist, which is usually not just like assassination, right? It's usually to get something somewhere, right? Gives them a reason to not just confront things head on, right? A reason why that won't work. And it gives you more flexibility to add fun things like, hey, there's a thing here that, you could confront head on, but you're not going to be able to do it and achieve the heist at the same time. So you got to figure out a way to run away from this thing or sneak around them or some other sideways plan.
Right. Before we jump into nuts and bolts, Matt, do you want to talk about some of our favorite heists? Do you want to discuss some of our inspirations here, things that you really like when you're thinking heists?
I guess it's got to be the Lufthansa robbery, because no one ever caught them. So the one from Goodfellas, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
You gotta. I mean, all the heists that we really know about is like, it's because they got caught. So,
I mean, I was thinking movies, but if we're talking about that,
okay.
gotta love DB Cooper. That's
Right.
another real life heist that never got caught. Was that a heist?
Or he just
Nobody really knows.
died in the wilderness, the Mountain West is vast.
There's a bag of money decaying somewhere in the Mountain West, but maybe he's still out there somewhere, DB Cooper. I think.
But yeah, movies. Sorry.
Part of what makes this so fun and so easy is there's such like a rich selection to draw from. I love. I mean, Die Hard is a heist movie at its core. And this is a great example because you don't have to get complicated, but a great way to like make a heist interesting is that it's a heist, but, right? So Die Hard is a heist movie, but you think they're terrorists at the beginning, right? Another favorite of mine is Inside Man, which is a heist movie. Spike Lee's 2006. It's got Denzel Washington and Clive Owen. It's great. Terrific movie. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it kind of switches from like a how do they do it to like a why did they do it and a who done it, and it all I think makes sense in the end, but it's a real like head scratcher, and it's brilliant, well acted, and yeah, I think you only need like one layer of misdirection to really like make a heist truly shine. Like just, there's just something a little bit weird about it, right? And which is why I think setting them in a fantasy or sci-fi setting is perfect, because then you can really get creative with like what that misdirection is.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. You don't have to work too hard to make this impressive for your players. I mean, for me, can't go wrong with any of the classics, Reservoir Dogs, Heat. We mentioned Inception before, Point Break, always a classic. For me, Fast Five, as ridiculous and stupid as it is, is great just because it feels like a role-playing game, and that they're getting more and more ridiculous, and a more simple plan would have served them better, but in the end they're dragging a giant safe through the streets being chased by tanks, and it's a lot of fun. So go watch Fast Five again. That's my recommendation.
This reminds me of another great part of the heist structure, which isn't necessary but works so well in an RPG, which is the getting the team together stage, right? Like it's something that makes it very easy for you to give your players a reason to work together and to like introduce their characters. Again, it provides just like a structure for who are you? Where did you come from? Why are you working together? Because all of these movies kind of have, or many of them have, sort of this introductory phase where they...
Oh, I have a note on that.
Okay.
What if you just want to run a heist in whatever game you're already playing, in your modern, spy thriller game or your fantasy D&D game? Is whoever's hiring you wants you to prove themselves, and just give everyone 5 minutes and say, what's the thing they do that shows off their skills that happens in the background? Someone picking some locks, someone just doing some street cons, a wizard creating a pass wall, that kind of stuff. And the camera goes around and gives your player characters, your party, a chance to show off their skills.
It's perfect. I love it.
Okay, so if you're organizing a heist, here are the things I think you have to consider. And Rob, let me just run down the big 4 bullet lists, and then we can talk about each one in particular, and then maybe some notes on what you should keep in mind when prepping a heist game. So
sounds good.
I think, and maybe I'm missing some things, and there's obviously some subparts here, but the 4 parts to a heist game is the score, the thing that you got to get or put back, the scene where it takes place, the prep work or the phases of prep. What, you kind of need a loose idea of what the players could possibly do. You don't have to know hardly anything, but you just need a loose idea. And then finally, you need a few unexpected twists to add, right?
Yeah.
And we'll save those for last. So let's talk about the beginning here, the score. Person, thing, idea, animal, vegetable, mineral. What should we say about the thing, the MacGuffin players are going after?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great place for some creativity or innovation, but also it's one of the areas where it can just literally be a big bag of coins, and that's usually just fine. But like I said, I think that something that's fun to do is a reverse heist, putting something back, a stolen idol, a magical artifact. It's also, Matt and I, not to toot our own horn, but like we had a heist where the players had to go into the afterlife and, bring back somebody's soul. That's the kind of thing that can, or find a particular soul. Again, these are fantasy, science fiction. The world is your oyster. You can do anything as wild as you want.
Right. It could be the formula that cures, in quotation marks, superpowers. It could be the literal steps to getting rich and becoming God by drill.
I mean, this is also...
but it works because it's fantasy.
Because it's fantasy. Actually, that's a great example. Most, both Pathfinder and D&D, Pathfinder has the... What's it called?
The Test of the Starstone.
But there's also like the Golden Lotus extract or something that makes the immortality potion.
Oh,
and
when they write those sections of the world book, they're just like, please set up an adventure to steal this. Please set up an adventure to steal this.
I mean,
there's
that
so
would be
many good details around that.
Yeah, that would be a very high level adventure, but that's like the perfect thing. That's just like such a perfect object to be like, we're going to steal the one, dose of this immortality potion made the entire year. Something you could also subvert this. This was what I think one of the things that made Firefly so memorable is there were multiple heists, and then it's like these are rations, right? We're gonna steal medicine. This is like both world building and like a really like clever subversion of the trope. So like depending on your world, like if it's a high magic world, you can have them steal something like an immortality potion. Whereas if it's like a dirt planet farmer, the thing that they're stealing can be just, seed corn or something.
Exactly. The lesson from Firefly is it should be very personal to your party and your world, right? If you're running a traditional fantasy campaign, it's your ancestor's sword that is now in a museum or owned by some rich asshole, right? And if it's a hard Scrabble, hard sci-fi campaign, it's the seed corn that your cousins were going to use to farmstead Barnard's Moon or whatever.
I mean, this is another good way to spice this up, and this is something that Cyberpunk Red emphasizes and focuses on, is make it personal, right? This is what's great about the some of the Ocean's movies and the Italian Job, is it's personal, right? They're not just doing a theft. They're stealing from somebody who wronged them. This is a great setup for a heist, is to not only have it be about stealing something interesting, but stealing from somebody who deserves it, or who they specifically want to take from. This is a great way to add some variety.
A good way to combine this is if you've got that player that's like, here's my part of my backstory that I want you to incorporate in some way, and you don't have any grand plans for it. Because heists are great one or two shots, right? You can be like, a contact has some deets on that person that wronged you, and this thing of theirs is available to steal. Everyone else in the party has a reason to do it because there's a payday or a cool thing that they get at the end, and you can take it out on that person that you hate. Speaking of people or persons, right? It could also be a person, a people. You could steal a people, right? It's commonly called kidnapping. And is usually wrong. But if it's a heist, it's maybe someone held against their will, right? People make interesting heist things because you kind of already have a little complication there in that you have to negotiate with this person.
This was sort of the core idea behind I think the first and second Transporter movie starring Jason Statham, is that he was transporting a person. It was like a person heist.
But he never looks at the cargo. Wait, is he Australian or whatever? He's British.
He's British, but he's got one of those
I never ask about the
working
cargo.
class
Yeah,
British
sorry.
accents. I don't know which one
Not
it
the
is.
Queen's English.
No.
No. Yeah, it's a person, and he never talks to the cargo, and that person talks back, and they have opinions.
Which is, again, this is a fun twist. It's still just a heist, but if you're moving a person, whether they're voluntarily or involuntarily being moved, either taken somewhere or removed from somewhere, that adds a lot of like we've already just. I'm loving this because I'm just thinking of all the ways that, you know, without changing any of the structure, right? It's still just a heist, just dozens of different variations on the idea. Like you could have a table and roll on this and come up with a bunch of exciting, brilliant, challenging jobs, ad infinitum.
Right, and you add that fantasy slap on top of it, and that person is now a ghost, a talking brain, a talking magic item, a baby dragon that is more intelligent than you and has opinions. Like,
a baby dragon's a great one. Capturing or moving or transporting a baby dragon, that's full of hijink potential.
Baby dragon, just like the movie Baby Driver, would be really, really great with what's it? Ansel Egbert.
Ansel yeah.
No, Elgort. Ansel
Elgort.
Elgort voices Baby Dragon in the upcoming heist film by Edgar Wright. Okay, so that's the score. That's your MacGuffin. That's your thing you need to get. Let's talk about the scene, right? And you want to get, I think. Here's the thing. I think Rob and I have mentioned before. You only have to get creative like once in this. So if your score is the ghost of, you know, the first king of your kingdom who knows where all the skeletons, maybe literally, are buried, and is very valuable for that reason, you've already had the heist could take place in a castle. It's fine. Perfect.
Just be in some guy's house. Yeah.
Right. It's in some guy's house. But, this is also a chance to really make things interesting. Robbing a casino on their biggest night or, a fancy mansion at the night of the biggest party of the year is way more interesting than just a castle. Right. But again, you don't have to make everything turned up to 11. But what are some of our favorite ideas for scenes and things to think about with the scene?
Yeah. I mean, I sort of put this into two categories. When I think about my favorite heist, is there's what you just described. There's an event, and at that event, there's going to be something worth stealing. So there's a combination of somebody's doing social stuff and somebody's behind the scenes. Did you see Logan Lucky, Matt?
Yeah, no, I did not see that. Sorry.
It's great because they're robbing like the Daytona 500 or something like that. Like the one of the Channing Tatum's guy works for a construction company and he has like a plan. It's a great heist movie. Very redneck. I loved it. But so there's that, right? And a lot of the Ocean's movies are like this. Somebody has to go and be charming. They're at the Met Gala and there's a diamond necklace they want to steal. This is a great, lots of opportunities for changing situations, improvisation. The other sort of big trope in my mind is the impenetrable vault, right? There's 10 tons of titanium steel door behind an electrified fence, and you have to cross over a bunch of laser wires, and there's a moat filled with sharks and lava piranhas, and and then the problem is how do you solve this incredibly complicated puzzle? And if you're doing fantasy sci-fi, you can get really wild with it's a floating adamantium sphere in the center of a demiplane that is
it's in the ethereal plane, surrounded by a storm.
Inside the pocket of a wandering ogre magi, and it's just you can get really wild with it. But you can also combine these things. But these are the sort of the two. If I'm balancing my minds, the two most exciting approaches to your scene is an event of some sort or a very challenging security puzzle.
Right. And you can kind of decide where you want to be on that spectrum depending on how much social interaction you want between players and NPCs. Maybe if you're running a very social game, the vault with just a bunch of traps and things that you have to get through with your clever wits, maybe that's a perfect break from your regular game. I guess my two big overall advices for the scene is there needs to be as many possible points of entry and exit, and that if players suggest another one, it should exist, right? The one big thing is if there's one way in and one way out, that's fine if it's a dramatic choke point, but then once you're past that, there's got to be lots of ways your players can move around. Otherwise, there's nothing for them to plan, which will be important in a second.
Yeah, this is a good point. Sorry. It should not be a Mission Impossible. There's exactly one entrance into this secret data vault, and you can only get to it by one way. There can be, like Matt said, like a dramatic choke point, but you want your players to be able to come up with creative ideas. So design a, death trap of a vault if you like, but make sure that you are open to their suggestions, right? Like that however they want to approach it, that works. Don't try to funnel them into one solution, because otherwise that's not any fun. And Matt's right, they don't have anything to plan.
Right. And it's like, okay, if you're like, okay, this is a mansion with 20 different entrances and exits, and getting in is not a problem, it's the guards, that's fine. If there's if there's finally one vault door they have to get by, there's got to be some ways they can get around the security. Kind of everything's got to have multiple ways, right? It could be an illusion or directing the guards to the false vault or something like that. You gotta leave yourself just enough room that when your players start coming up with plans, you can help them work. Which, sidebar, one of the fun things about the heist, and here's a little secret that we don't often share on this show, is we usually want our players to win.
Yeah, right.
Right. And so, like, when you're playing a heist, you're really just like coming up with some shit that your players are going to be able to tear down. But we're pretending here. We're pretending that they don't know, and they will probably forget that you designed this so that it could. Oh well. If we stole some of those disguises that the guards are wearing, we could sneak in. I bet they never thought of that. And maybe you didn't, but maybe you did. And that's okay.
This reminds me of how we talk about running just mysteries in general in TTRPGs, where you just have to give, like, it's not a tightly crafted Agatha Christie movie where you have to have caught every single clue to be able to put it together, because that doesn't work as a collaborative game and storytelling experience. You have to drop way more hints than you think you're going to need so your players will pick it up, because they just don't work like that. So similarly, in a heist movie, there can be exactly one point of failure and the lead has to get everything exactly right, and that's very exciting. That's not good for a TTRPG. That's not going to be fun for your players most of the time, because it really relies on them knowing exactly what you're thinking and getting it exactly right the way that you planned it. So do remember to approach it a little differently.
Yeah. Another thing you got to remember that's a little different is you don't want to make it too dungeon-y, and I mean this. I earlier said your skills for drawing dungeon maps and layouts with multiple entrances and exits will really pay off here, and they will. But you got to remember that in a heist, everyone tends to have a little more freedom of movement after they've accomplished one or two things. And so, you shouldn't plan encounters or things that can't be handled on their own, or maybe silently, or could serve as a distraction. You don't want to have, okay, well then there's a CR7 Manticore here that my CR4 party will need all of them to fight, and there's no way around this Manticore that wants to fight to the death. You gotta lots of rooms less combat encounters or
Yeah.
almost none in most of those rooms.
I think having like a guardian that has to be fought is a pretty okay trope, and especially in like a fantasy game, that can make sense for your heist. But Matt's right. Don't fill the vault your vault with like a bunch of wandering monsters, because it can be a dungeon, but it should feel different. You lose the tension, right, of a heist if you are, constantly battling random encounter foes, or even not random encounter foes, but like I would say none to one combat for a heist is appropriate.
And yeah, you may have wandering people or guards and stuff like that, and that's fine. But I think the way to think about this, I was going to save this point for later, but it's a really good one, is that failure on a task because they did a plan that is just really, really stupid and they didn't find out some information, it means this is going to happen. They encounter some kind of twist. We'll talk about that in a second. Or they roll really poorly, right? They fail a stealth check, or, they fail to knock out a guard or something like that. Their spell misfires. Failure should, instead of meaning everything goes crazy and we're in combat rounds now, failure should usually mean complication, right? As opposed to hard stop, right? They
Yes.
do succeed. They do sneak by, right? But now they've picked up a tail. The mischievous imp that is the wizard's familiar is now following them, right? But they snuck by the guards, right? That's not what failure meant in this situation. So failure means complication, not failure.
Yeah, and this is a good lesson to take from the Hitman or Assassin's Creed or Thief games, right? You can fight in those games, and you can even be good at fighting. But if you're fighting your way through a job, you've probably fucked up somewhere, right? You really want to be getting in and out without being noticed, and you can still succeed and do well if you got to kill a guard or two. But the more of that's happening, the more that you're not succeeding gracefully. And I think that's a good model for you to think about your heists, right? Like the more the players fuck up, the more complications, the more guards they encounter, the more traps they set off, the more potential consequences there are after they're done.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Matt's right. They are going to make mistakes, and you want to be able to add complications without ending the job, right? You don't want a super sensitive door that slams shut if they step on the wrong pressure plate and can never be opened again, especially if that's something they might overlook. But you do want consequences.
Right. It's more like the gate starts closing and they have to pick which side they're going to be on. Either is fine, but it's going to be complicated because now the party's split up and they have to proceed different ways through the mansion. Speaking of Assassin's Creed, oh no, there's going to be an Assassin's Creed game where the Pinkertons are actually the Knights Templar trying to preserve mystical ancient alien artifacts. Okay. So favorite scenes, Rob. I love a factory, like a magic item factory, a potion factory. What about an auction? What about a dwarf auction for rights to elemental magma min harvesting deep below the Earth's crust?
Ooh, I like that.
What are some of your favorite ideas?
I love I obviously love a train, but I love variations on a train.
Yeah, anything moving, a caravan through the silted sea.
Could be a large lumbering beast with a small village on its back, that appears. Oh, sorry. This literally just came to me. The third Aladdin movie is about stealing the hand of Midas from a city that only appears once every 100 years because it's on the back of a giant turtle. That's fucking rad. That's cool as hell. But yeah,
gotta steal to eat, gotta eat to live.
Gotta eat to live.
Otherwise I'd get long. Okay.
Stealing something from an Eberron skyship would be incredible.
An exotic menagerie filled that's stocked for gladiator fights.
Yes.
Like a temple or a church that's inhabited by ghost saints or living saints or something like that, and they're wandering around in their robes. Yeah, why not get really wacky with it? It's a party for the most famous demigods throughout the universe, right? And they obviously don't care that much about people stealing mortal shit, but they're really scary or really weird.
If you're really if you're really excited about puzzles and about, and if you have a much better sort of geometric mathematical mind than me, once again, fantasy and science fiction allows you to get real wild with like Escher-esque mazes and traps and things. You can have a demi-plane that's got tesseracting rooms or something like that. You can get really, really bonkers and send your players on very interesting and challenging puzzles to find something like a nth dimensional cube to bring back to the regular
world. And
world.
if mapping that out scares you, I steal something from a book we'll recommend at the end of the episode. Why not make it the plane of dreams, where you don't have to map things out other than in a fuzzy way, but traveling through there is weird in that you can connect from any one point to another through an emotion or through circuitous logic that might connect one spot in the plane to another. And this brings us to our next thing is you got to let your players do some prep and do the actual heist, right? So we can think about the actual action in two phases, right? Some legwork, and then an interlude where the players put all that information together and come up with some kind of plan, and then where that plan meets the actual location. So we've got the legwork and the wet work. I guess wet work's just assassinations. Well, you have two halves.
Yeah.
Right.
Legwork
okay,
and
so
execution, I guess we'll call it. Yeah.
Execution's just murder, Rob. Okay, fine. Legwork. So you want to let your players spy out the place. You want to let them gather information, talk around town. This should be like, you should give everyone something for whatever they do. This is the perfect time to say, okay, y'all need to do some prep if you want to pull off this heist that you've been talking about. What's everyone going to do? And no matter what they do, everyone should come up with some bit of information.
This is one of my favorite things to do as a player. I love the legwork. I love the prep part. I have found that this is not a universal love, and that a lot of people can get overwhelmed or tripped up or just stuck on the planning phase, which is why I now believe that Blades in the Dark's method of approaching this is perfect, which is where you sort of like start in the action and then kind of work backwards from there. And I would recommend that if you can make this work, you just steal this and do some combination of two. Let your players prep, let them plan, let them come up with like legwork, but at a certain point say, all right, we're just going to jump to it. And then if you want, we can have a flashback and you can say, actually, I wanted to have set up this thing, and this was put there ahead of time by whoever, and you can give them a limited number of uses of that, or make it cost some otherwise. But asking your players to come up with a fully fleshed out plan, because they are not Frank Ocean and the crew, it is a bit of a tall order unless they are really, really excited about this type of thing.
Yeah, this is where a lot of the heisting can go wrong, is if your players are unsure how to plan, or not all into it, or deeply committed to over planning. Without using this great story, Blades in the Dark system hack, there are some ways you can make this go a little more smoothly. One I would recommend is just say, okay, there's a time limit, right? The event is happening tonight. The only time you can get in is tonight. You have one day. Or you could just say, hey, we're doing the heist today in like real time. So here's what I want everyone to do is I want everyone to tell me one or two things their character does, or a team of characters do. If you know there's people who are into it and are not, have them team up. You tell me what you do. I'll see if you need to make any checks. I'll give you the information you need to know. Okay, there are 12 guards. This is what their uniforms look like. There's this, right? So just do once around the table or twice around the table and then say, all right, now everyone needs to make a plan. Maybe a little, immersion breaking, but I think everyone will realize that, yeah, if we really wanted to do this right, we would plan forever and then maybe not do it because crime can sometimes be difficult.
Yeah. If we're easy, anyone would do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's important to, unless your players love this and know how to go about it and are going to be able to self-regulate, you should put some limitations on it. Either, go once or twice around the table, or say, you all have 30 minutes to make this plan, and then we're going to go on to the next step. So start talking and don't get distracted. Or give them some other kind of limitation so that they do not either feel overwhelmed or spend the entire time planning.
But you don't have to overthink it. You could luck out and everyone could be into the legwork part.
Yep.
Oh, I'm going to go talk to the people who are going to be the guests and score some invitations. I'm going to map out the building. People might get really into it, in which case that's great. This is a really fun way to play the game and let your players do it. Eventually, you should bring them back together and you should just ask them, however, what's the plan, right? And if they don't know what a plan is, if they don't have one, just ask them, what's your point of entry? Stealing this from Blades in the Dark. Let's just pick a place to start somewhere. The point of entry could be, we have invitations to the gala. We're going to wait until cocktail hour, right? Or the big speech. Perfect. That's the point of entry. Or it could be that loose second story skylight.
I'm conflicted because I love the legwork part, right? It's my favorite part, but it also has the potential to be frustrating if it doesn't go according to plan, right? Like if the plan falls apart or your players do something that isn't gonna make sense with the scene as you have laid it out. So Matt, you mentioned it being like a little immersion breaking, but I think you have to be prepared to kind of just say things openly and potentially, reveal the fiction a little bit in order to make sure that it all goes smoothly from here. This is one of the critical parts, I think, of the heist.
Maybe this can't be avoided, but I think the best way is to just give the players as much information as you can, right?
Yeah.
As much information as you have, right? Which means I might have to skip ahead in what we're going to talk about, but what do you need for planning and preparing a heist? It's essential you have not maybe a map, though a map is really, really great, but some kind of description of the layout, right? And the players should have 95% of the information. I think that's what makes heist work really well in the planning versus action setup, is give them almost everything, right? And keep a couple things back, and then the twists that can emerge later can be things either that they didn't discover or things they would have no way of ever discovering, right? Because if they've got a plan, if they come up with a plan and they do some legwork, give them all the information. Whatever plan they have should probably just work, right? If you have all the information, you should be able to solve the puzzle, right? It's like doing one of those mazes in the back page of the newspaper. Maybe you couldn't solve it if you were inside of it, but if you're looking over the top, yeah, you should be able to figure out how it works, right?
Mm-hmm.
Treat your heist the same way, but the one thing they didn't look at, right, or the one thing they didn't think to ask about, or something they had no way of possibly knowing, and this brings us to the fourth thing you want to prepare, is some sort of surprises, twists, or unexpected events that you can throw in. And again, you may already have some of these just because the players, well, they never asked who the guests were going to be. Right. And surprise, it's the Royal 23rd Paladin Honor Guard Division, and they're all armed to the teeth, right? So the plan of using a fiendish teleportation device might not work because they will detect evil. So they're going to have to find another way to get back out of the vault.
Yeah, this is a great point, and this is probably the area where you will need to do the least. Well, where you're probably going to have what you need. Because like Matt said, if you just sort of plan out, if you do all of the other prep work for the scene, and chances are good your players are not gonna ask about everything, right? So your twist can just be something that you already knew was there. But this is a great opportunity to have a few things in your back pocket in case it's going too well, right? Honestly, you don't want it to go too well. So a visiting dignitary shows up with their entire entourage, which includes several wizards that are casting True Sight everywhere to make sure that there's no spies or listening devices or whatever. Or it turns out that the empty room that leads to the vault is now full of, like Matt said, a manticore or a living statue that comes to life and attacks. I mean, this can be as...
It doesn't have to be a thing that attacks them. It can just be a thing that annoys them, you know?
It can be a thing that annoys
really,
them.
You don't have to, you don't want to go overboard with your twist and make it so that their entire plan is impossible. You should just make it so that it is whatever they're doing, something becomes more complicated, right? It doesn't have to be at the heist, right? I mean, a lot of my early days playing Shadowrun was a lot of spending a lot of time prepping, and then that getting us through about the first 20 minutes of the action, and then using a lot of grenades, right? And Shadowrun's a little more violent than I think your Ocean's 11 style heist, but that's okay too. And you kind of want to think about your heist when you're in your big picture is like, are we going to plan and execute the heist in one session? If so, I definitely want to keep things simple enough that they can go quickly, keep the planning to a minimum. Or is everyone okay with, we're spending a whole session planning and doing legwork. Next time is the action.
A complication, if everything else is set up well, can be as simple as there are more alarms than you expected. There are more guards than you expected. There are alarms or guards where they weren't supposed to be. A critical element is missing, right? Something perfectly mundane just doesn't work. The door is stuck. Right? Like a door you have to get through it's just jammed, or it's locked. Right. And it's not supposed to be locked. Like these things can add a ton of intensity to a heist, and they don't have to be very complicated. They can be very, very simple. They can be complicated, but simple is maybe even better, because if everything else is well planned, then there'll be plenty of tension already.
Right. And keep these twists, in your back pocket for when players roll a failure, right? And so instead of the door being magically locked, it's just stuck, and they need the barbarian actually over here. Except the barbarian, right, is going around sapping guards for your escape route, and so now you have to change roles or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. Which is always exciting. I mean, I think a lot of fun twists are, linked to betrayal. I don't think you should betray your players every time or it becomes really bad, but, try and think of, a little more creative things. I like, there's another thief there. One of the players' hirelings shows up, and actually they're here to help, but they were not part of the plan. They're here to help. So a friend shows up that you don't want here.
A classic, very fun heist complication is, there's another team of thieves or another thief that's there to steal the same thing. Doesn't have to be super complicated. You might not even need to really interact with the other thief, but it'll light a fire under your players. Similarly, maybe there's somebody who wants to steal the thing that the players are stealing. That's a great complication. Like, they actually get away with it, and some freeloader is waiting there with a bunch of goons to try to take it off them now that they've done the hard work of stealing it. I think generally when I think about complications, it's usually people related. There's somebody who's somewhere they're not supposed to be, or someone who's supposed to be somewhere who isn't, and the plan suddenly has to adapt to this human element. I like this because it reflects
a hero shows up, and he's like, I'm going to stop you from stealing these things. Right. It's my destiny. That's and, maybe they can be convinced, actually, this isn't bad that we're stealing this, maybe you have
Maybe
to
not,
deal with
yeah.
your own John McClane.
Yeah.
A twist, if everything goes off expectedly and the players pull off their plan, can always happen outside. All those complications from those missed stealth rolls and a failed social interaction mean that there are guards outside, and so now they get to have a chase at the end of their heist to get away. When you're prepping these, right, I think the really, really important things to remember is that, you got to give your players some time to make a plan. You got to make sure that plan mostly kind of works and watch them succeed. Throw in a few monkey wrenches. Just kind of keep things pretty open-ended, right? I like having everything mapped out, but when I actually run the heists, like what is in a room at that time, unless the players have established the guard's schedule, it lets me improv. Is it a guard, or is it a couple of young wizards that snuck away to have a wizard's duel over here, right? You can keep it light and loose, right? My favorite things to prep, besides having some kind of map, is like a D4 or a D6 long list of random people, right? Of names and what this person is doing there, right? And they could just be 4 different guards, but if you're going with a more fantastical thing, they're going to be like really interesting and exotic people that your players might meet. So it's along the rules of give everyone a name, but really have your players meet some interesting weirdos in their heist.
A lot of other things can be easily ad-libbed or more easily ad-libbed, but having some weirdos to throw in, I think, is key. Is a good thing to have on hand. That's also a good list to have for any RPG. I like to have that list for any game I'm running, but especially for a heist.
One I have definitely pulled on my players when they really made a really great plan, and I couldn't, they made all their rolls. I couldn't really think of any complications, and they congratulated themselves on a successful heist, is just to have some kind of disaster that may have been unintentionally caused by them happen, right? They caused a fight to break out as a distraction between the 2 rival wizarding clans or sorcerer clans, and so duels are happening, and so to escape now there's a full-on wizard sorcerer battle happening that they have to navigate, or the airship is crashing, the ship is sinking. If you feel like you need some action to really drive the session home to a dramatic conclusion.
Yeah, sorry, this has not been mentioned, but it's not a requirement that a heist have a time limit, but it's a good one. And if presumably they can't take as much time as they want, but a great addition / complication is that suddenly they just have much less time than they expected to complete the task, and that's always a great way to ramp things up and also move things along if it's taken too long.
And I would just say is, my last thought on heists really here is this is a chance for getting your players to work together, right, in unexpected ways, is to take them out of the slightly more rote combat roles that games like D&D push people into, and into the weirder roles of, I'm good at talking to people, you're really strong, you're really smart, and you're really sneaky. I need you to do this thing for me so I can do that thing for you.
Yep. It's a good way to either force your players to think about their characters beyond just what's on their sheet. Either if you're starting with a heist as like character creation, or if they're already established, kind of push them to think about, beyond their role in a combat encounter, for example, but in a way that, especially in D&D, is supported by the system, or at least somewhat supported.
And then, at the end, let your players enjoy whatever rewards they got, right?
Yes.
Let them have that cool heirloom sword that was their ancestors that was in the museum and now theirs. Let them make a powerful enemy or a powerful friend for the next who wants to hire them for the next job.
Let them enjoy the fruits of their labor. They should get a big payday.
Any final thoughts on heists or heist-related stuff? This has been a blast brainstorming through all these ideas with you.
Yeah, no, I've enthused, and I think I've said everything that I want. Definitely, if you are interested, especially if you are curious about how this would be run in 5th edition, check out our Celestial job, which we, I think the first adventure that we designed, actual prep on air. I think it's pretty good.
Looking back, I would like the conclusion to be a little less dungeon crawly, but everything else up to it, I think I'm still pretty happy with.
There's things I would do differently, but I think it's also a good one to learn from because we did make some mistakes, and but I think that it's a good place to start. But I think that if you can, you can just read the Blades of the Dark rules or parts of them on the Blades of the Dark website and get some ideas there. My
recommendation for a heist is instead of just the Celestial job is, and you can purchase this now on I think Itch and DriveThruRPG, is the Roleplayer's Guide to Heists, a collection of 35 capers for any tabletop RPG. The list of writers is very, very long, so I won't read them all, but there are some really talented role-playing game authors here and tons of heists, and even some thoughts on heists, tables full of stuff. It's great. This is, I think, a great resource. You could run so many of these straight out of the bag. I had a lot of fun reading it, and I'm running one of them in 2 or 3 weeks at one of my games. So
there's so many great resources. Let us know if there's something that you like that we didn't mention that you think is interesting, any ideas that you have. This is not the last time we will discuss heists, but
and you can let us know those thoughts at our email address, which is dmofnone@gmail.com. And we would also appreciate if you left us a rating and review on Spotify or iTunes. It helps other people find the show. And if you want more exciting Dungeon Master of None content, you can head over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/Dungeon Master of None.
That's right. Thanks for listening, everybody. You know what? I'm going to change my sign-off. I'm sorry, everybody. I'm changing the sign off. I started doing the stay healthy, stay safe thing in 2020 when we were in the middle of a pandemic and also the world was on fire. And nothing has changed all that dramatically. But
maybe it was bad luck.
It just doesn't feel appropriate anymore. So I am just gonna start saying, keep rolling them dice. Goodbye.
Bye.